Welcome to our Bio Entrepreneurship Seminar Series. Today we will be having our fourth seminar in this series, Licensing the Technology, Biotechnology Commercialization Strategies with Bandhana, Katoch. This seminar series is presented to you by LA Bioscience Hub and BCLA. And we would like to thank Pasadena City College, CNSI, and the USC Michelson Center for all their support and making this event possible. So before we begin, I'm just going to give a brief introduction about BCLA, who we are, and what we do. So our team consists of 22 members. We've been around for 6 years now, and in that time, we have gathered over 6,000 subscribers and over 100 partners. And we would especially like to thank our core sponsors, CNSI at UCLA and the USC Michelson Center, for all their continued support and just making our events possible. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and connect emerging scientists and entrepreneurs to grow and diversify biotechnology in Los Angeles. We host events at least once a month. These consist of networking mixers, seminars, panels, symposia, larger summits, and we host a yearly career conference as well. These are just some of our partners that we have worked with throughout the years. They range from larger companies like Amgen and Thermo Fisher, and we also have a lot of smaller startups based in the LA area that support us too. So our event partners for today's event are Pasadena City College and LA Bioscience Hub. We'd like to thank especially Jordanos for all the work that she's put into this seminar series and making this possible. And I would also like to just point out that we have 2 more events in this seminar series. One will take place on July 31st, and the next one will take place the following week. So make sure to register for these events. And with that being said, I would like to hand it over to Jordanos and Sadhna, who will be moderating today's event.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks, Kathy.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Jordanos Gabertatios. I am the Executive Director at LA Bioscience Hub. We're a nonprofit that's geographically focused on LA's east side, and we work to create a diverse workforce that's ready to enter the growing bioscience community here in LA. This is our 5th summer doing the Entrepreneurship Seminar Series as part of Biotech Leaders Academy, and we're so pleased to partner with Biotech Connect LA to present this 6-part webinar series online and make sure that it's broadly available to a larger audience. We're really fortunate today to have our guest speaker, Bandhana Katoch, Director of Sustainability Practice at Larta Institute, to speak on licensing the technology. Before I turn it over to Bandhana, just a little housekeeping. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in using the Q&A feature in your Zoom control panel. We're going to be taking questions throughout the presentation, and so you don't have to save them until the end. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Bandhana.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Excited to be here. And now I will share my screen. Okay, so good morning, everyone. I would first like to thank Sadhna here, Jordanos here, Kathy, to inviting me for this opportunity. I'll take you through the topic of licensing the technology and a little bit dive into a few other areas which we had discussed before to explore during this webinar. So just the overview of the presentation, I'll introduce Larta Institute, where I currently work as Director of Sustainability, some basics of licensing, why is it important for you all as you are starting your career in biotechnologies and other areas of STEM, why is it important for you to understand the concept of licensing, some success stories you may or may not know, and then little aspects of alternative career in sciences. So with that, let me introduce Larta Institute, where I currently work. Larta is a nonprofit organization. It is LA-born organization. It was started in the 1990s. We are a mission-driven nonprofit with the clear objective of supporting entrepreneurs and innovative technologies in the area of feed, fuel, and heal the world. We are a network-centric approach. We have relationships with innovators, with advisors, with thought leadership, and we take great pride in supporting many technologies which you currently see in the world as a commercial product. About myself a little bit, I'm Bandhana Katoch again. I'm Director for Sustainability Practice, and it sure has been a long, dwindly road for me. I started my career as a cancer researcher with technical degrees in cancer biology, biochemistry and entomology, both from India and US. I shifted my gear as a business professional, doing an MBA in marketing and management, and I'll go over that a little bit later on. Worked as a technology transfer professional, where you take your research from the lab to marketplace. That was my role for about 13 years. And then recently, I have also been a legal professional in JD with intellectual property. And as you see, the journey is not over yet, many more milestones to achieve in the coming years, but this is where it has been long, dwindly road. With that brief introduction about myself, let's start talking about the topic for today, licensing technology. And I tried to keep it fairly broad in a sense so that it gives you a broader concept, and hopefully that would trigger more interaction during the conversation today. License, you hear that word often. If you are a Microsoft user, the moment you download a new Microsoft, you see a license going on there. So each one of us deal with licensed products. We just never think of it as licensed products, or they have become such an important part of our lives that we just click. How many times you have downloaded a new app and you never read through those terms and agreement and just say, I accept, and you go. Every time you do that, you're signing a license agreement to use that app, just to bring that concept to it. So license is a contract which allows, there are two parties here, licensee and licensor. So it allows licensee to practice a proprietary technology and provide that information which is owned by licensor. And usually it is in exchange of money, or it is in exchange of a different level of compensation. So there are, in this story, if you want to see licensing as a story, there are 4 key characters in that story. And the most important character in that story is proprietary technology. Licensees, licensors, and then the exchange of monetary or other compensation which happens under every agreement. So with that, I'll dive into proprietary technology, most commonly known as intellectual property. We also see that many times in different areas where we say, oh, that's proprietary aspect. All the recipes in big food brands are proprietary information as well. So let's talk about intellectual property a little bit. So intellectual property really is a creation of mind. But I do want you guys to think of, when you say property, it's something tangible you hold. And when you say intellectual, it's a property which is generated through your intellectuality. And that's the creation of mind. It is an idea which can translate into a tangible form. So for example, if you are in the lab creating a drug, that's an idea which translated into a drug. So now when it is a tangible form, it's an intellectual property. Similarly, you can be an artist designing the logos. You can be an artist who's designing a sculpture. All those forms, as long as they're in your mind, they are the ideas. When they get into tangible form, that becomes an intellectual property. So I always want you to think of, when it's property, it has to be tangible. And therefore, an idea is not an intellectual property. An idea translating into tangible form is an intellectual property. With that, intellectual property can be protected by law, and sometimes it cannot be. So there are few examples which we commonly hear about from protected by law are patents, copyrights, softwares, designs, and trademarks. And I'll go into each one of them a little bit in detail in few minutes here. But then there are some intellectual properties which you cannot protect by law, at least. And those are know-hows, and the trade secrets. Most often the trade secrets can be processes which cannot be protected, or trade secrets can be a little bit of nuances. When you're eating a particular pecan pie from your grandma or your family, and you see that particular taste which you are just never able to replicate, it just doesn't come right. And that is the trade secret of your grandma or your ma in making that. So that's how you would like to think of trade secret. It also enables, intellectual property enables people to gain recognition. It enables people to think of financial benefit. Now, a lot of people think, oh, we lead a very simplistic life. Do we really deal with such products? Have you ever used spoon and fork in your life? And if you have, if you're the person who eats with knife, spoon, and fork, and not an Indian like me who can eat with hands as well, then you are looking at spoon and fork was one of the first technology which was patented. It was way back in 1700s in Europe, where people invented how they could design the spoon and fork and even the process of eating the spoon and fork. Of course, it was a European style, a continental style of eating, which was tried to be patented, which the process was denied, although spoon and fork did get a patent. So that's in recognition. Over the years, we might not think of it that way, but this is a tradition. Lot of times now the current norms of intellectual property is where people think, oh, the diabetic injection is so expensive because pharma companies own a patent, and therefore it is not eligible. But I do want to kind of birth that myth a little bit, and the reason for that is you all are young minds in the scientific world, and it is very important to understand that myth buster, why intellectual property is important. The premises of creating an intellectual property was that a person who is continuously creating innovations in their mind and taking efforts to translate into a tangible product should be compensated for their hard work, because their hard work translates into a convenient life for us as a common man. And so for that, the intellectual property rights were created. It allowed them to have a monopoly, but those monopolies were offered only on a certain time frame, 15 years, 20 years. So you could be compensated for the work you put in to get. Many of you who are in the labs understand that a small pill of drug probably takes 10 years to become in that form. And so this is a way to create that compensation, which of course, whenever there is a law, there is a loophole, and there are people who can create that. So I do want you as a scientist to think of it as a negative right. It is a right which is created for your inventions, where you are allowed to use it and others may not be. So it's a negative right, it's not a positive right. Just the way when you own a house, that's a negative right. When you own a house, you have a right to not allow someone into your home. So that's how usually people see that as a positive right. So think of it as a negative right. It allows you to ask someone to leave. And similarly is the intellectual property. And in order for the effort as an inventor you have put in is what is compensated as a financial benefit. But at the same time, they had in mind to create that balance between the interest of an innovator and a public interest. And innovation is important only if it can be translated into a public interest. The drugs, the devices, the vaccines, the day-to-day life are if you are currently sitting in an AC room, if you are currently using an LED light, if you're watching a flat screen TV, or if you're watching my webinar on the flat screen computer, all that was invented by the creation of mind of somebody. So we all are the beneficiary of those, and that IP law is what it creates that. So hopefully that gave you a brief understanding of what proprietary technology means and why IP is important for you to understand, and how licensing plays a role in then translating that intellectual property into the hands of us. So with that, we have touched upon a little bit of these things already. There are 4 or 5 major kinds of intellectual property. I have limited this slide just for the ones which can be protected by law. So patents, which are inventions, there have to be 3 things which are important for filing a patent. It should be unique and novel. It should have a utility. Again, public interest balance. So it should have a utility. They will not allow you to create a monopoly for even a 10 years if it is of no use. Then non-obvious. So it cannot be, oh, if you mix sodium and chloride, that becomes sodium chloride, and that's a salt. So you can't put those things together. It has to be non-obvious, which has not been thought of before. Copyright, work of authorships, different kind of specifications, formulas, those are all copyright. Trademarks are the logos or the distinctive names. Trade secrets, different formulas, and then designs the unique way it looks. So I do want to say, this is one of my favorite slides which come out of USPTO. Can you recognize the inventions here? What we see here is an exoskeleton, motorized exoskeleton. If you have a family member who, for whatever reason, or a friend circle or somebody on the TV who is able to walk, who is able to run, who is disabled but is able to do, that's a mind of creation. Next one, if you are holding an iPhone in your hand or an Android phone, iPhone is one of the well-known patented technology. The next one here is drone. And many of us think the drone is the latest invention, but it was first filed in 1967. It just took us 40, 50 years to get it where we are now, currently utilizing the drone technology. Graphene. And also, if any one of you have traveled in Europe and have gone through the train of magnetic levitation, that also is a patent which came in 1962. So this kind of things, every bus you get in, every train you take, every motorized vehicle, every car has hundreds of patents involved, which makes you enable go from home to party, go to home to this thing. And so we all are beneficiaries of the patents which were created. Another thing I wanted to elaborate on, this is copyright. So the picture of former President Obama you see on the left side was something which was taken by a Washington Post photographer. And then the image you see, which became his campaign slogan during his 2008 and 2016 campaign, was something which was designed by an artist. And there was a huge copyright issue, but the artist won that because he said that was an image of a fact, and what he created, the hope, is a creative art of authorship. And so that's how the copyright aspect. Coca-Cola, of course, you might think of it as a trademark. The reason I wanted to bring in Coca-Cola, that is one of the most protected and most expensive trade secret in the world. That is why it is never going to get acquired, because people just can't pay Coca-Cola. It's more than 100 years old trade secret. It has just been there forever. And the last one, if this one is immediately striking you and you're looking at your Snickers at the moment, the Nike, that's the trademark, just do it. So that's, once that trademarks becomes the recognition of your brand, it becomes an intellectual property. When you say mergers and acquisitions and a company goes out in $250 million and you think, what did they have? It was just an Uber app, or it was just, that trademark has now been recognized as a brand. And when it has been recognized as a brand, it has a tangible asset, and that can be valued. So that's just in our day-to-day life. I wanted to bring it to your notice how you as future scientists hold the doors of many such inventions which we all will benefit out of from. I'll stop here for a few minutes just to see if anyone has any questions or anything.
We have a question from the audience. It's, what is the expiration of trademarks and copyrights, etc.?
So for copyright, it used to be 70 years. So lifetime of an author, now as it stands today, lifetime of an author plus 90 years. So if I write a book today and I die tomorrow, for example, very morbid statement to say, but if that happens, it will still add, my copyright will continue all the way till 2110. So 90 years of lifetime. And that is why a lot of books which were written in the 18th century are now coming out of copyright. And that is why you see a sudden surge of movies forming into copyrights, because those books were protected under copyright. And Sorry, go ahead.
I have a follow-up question to that. Is there a negotiation for how long something can be patented when it is very immediately in the need of the public's interest, even though there is a stake for the innovator, like a vaccine or something that's urgently needed?
So patent prosecution can take time, but for example, we are currently in a very unique situation in pandemic, right? And so there will be some vaccines which would be created during this time. Patent term starts when you file it. So if today I am able to invent a vaccine and I file a patent, that prosecution can take long time. It has nothing to do for you to start practicing the technology. So you can still take that vaccine and start licensing it out, start forming it out. Patent is different from FDA clinical trials, and that is an important distinction to make. Patent protects the intellectual property. FDA clinical trial is what will allow you to say whether it can be used on humans or not. So two different things. They run parallel though. Most often people file patent first, they try to secure that, and then they do clinical trials. But in current times, like vaccine, Gilead Sciences is working aggressively on a COVID-19 vaccine. And so they filed patent and clinical trials at the same time. Did that answer your question, Sadhna?
Sadhna, you're on mute.
I think so, yes. So I'm going to give you one more audience question. How is software patented? So if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. So software used to be patented often, and that's what gave Apple and Microsoft significant amount of leeway when they started in 1980s and 90s. However, in recent cases, in last 10 years, there have been significant seminal cases where filing a patent on a software has become more and more difficult. And the reason for that is the way coding is done now. Lot of codes are copied from the other codes to design something new. And that is why finding the non-obvious aspect of it and novel aspect of it is becoming very difficult. And more, if you are designing an invention which has a hardware component and a software component, then you really want to look into it. And when you're designing a code, you want to be cautious of how much code you're taking from open sources, because that's becoming a problem now. But software can still be copyrighted.
Thank you. I'm sure the audience member will feel like you answered that question really well. And I want to thank you for a really clear introduction. We have, I think because you laid it out so beautifully, we have a lot of questions, and I'll let Jordanos throw another audience question at you.
Yeah. The next question is, how specific does a pharma patent need to be before an FDA trial?
So if you are looking into, if you're thinking of it depends if you're thinking of a drug, biological, or device, the three different aspects, right? So if you're looking into a drug, specific to patent doesn't need to be. If you have something which is working in your cell cultures, if it is working in your cell lines, then that is ready to go to patent, because patent is more looking into, it's not looking into safety, it's not looking into biocompatibility. And by the time patent prosecution happens, hopefully you have gone through your cell lines to your small animal studies, to your large animal studies, and you're ready to go for clinical trial. So that almost parallels. So my suggestion would be, if you have come up with a patent, if you have come up with any kind of drug, device, or biological which is currently working in cell line, and you feel comfortable that it will move into small animal studies, this would be the right time to file a patent.
And then we have one final question, I know, because this is just the first section of your presentation. So what about exclusivity in pharma patents? If it's a rare or underutilized patent, can you explain that after a patent runs out, exclusivity after a patent runs out?
Okay, so if you're looking at after the patent term gets over, then there is no exclusivity. Exclusivity is given only, as I said, it's a negative right, given only for a limited time period to compensate the inventor, right? So that negative right is for defined time. Suppose you file a patent today and you had 10 years to get through your clinical trial. Now you only have 10 years to actually commercialize it, then that's what you get. And that is why a lot of people run towards class 1 devices instead of class 3 devices, because that can take a long time. But once the patent term is over, then there is no exclusivity, there is no monopoly. And that's where the generic drugs come into play. So literally the day your patent was filed and the day your clinical trial starts, generic companies will start reverse engineering your product, because they know by the time you run out, they're ready for the production. So that's how you see the generic drugs. So after your patent term, no exclusivity. Your negative right to enjoy the work you have created is over.
They're always ready to bounce. That's what I'm hearing. Thank you for answering those questions. I think we'll let you proceed with the rest of your presentation until the next stop, and we'll take questions after that. I want to encourage people to use the Q&A feature and not the chat feature. We're trying to moderate questions and do our best here. Please help us out. Use the Q&A feature. Thank you.
Okay. So moving on to next one, in the previous section, I kind of talked a lot about proprietary technology. So now hopefully that has given you an image of, if you are the creator, you are the owner of that intellectual property. So then how does it translate from your hand to the hands of everyone? And that's usually through license agreements, which I mentioned before. So licensee, for that matter, is the party that receives the license. And licensor is the party that grants the licensee. So the example I gave you, you as an owner of the intellectual property are the licensor, and the technology to whom you're transferring is the licensee. I do want to take you a little bit through scientific minds and engaged in STEM. I think it is important to kind of go through the cycle a little bit in detail. So I've already gone through the concept of raw idea. You have an idea, you translate into proof of concept, you do some research and experimental study, which now becomes an invention. Then you file a patent, and then you do product viability and commercial potential. That's the stage where you are doing your large animal studies, you are doing your clinical trials, you are beta testing if you're a software invention, and you are also filing your FDA compliance for 510K, CLIA waiver, whatever category you are in. That all falls under product viability and commercial potential, because at that time, you have already taken a step now to take it to the market. And a lot of you who are now engaged in entrepreneurs, because I know this is Biotechnology Entrepreneurship Series, so I'm assuming that many of you are entrepreneurs or an aspiring entrepreneurs. That is where you would be the most active. You'll be looking at market, you'll be looking at competitive landscape, you'll be looking at every aspect of barriers to entry for your commercialization. It can be R&D, it can be marketing, it can be regulatory, all that comes here. And then finally, you make a decision. If you are a university researcher or a faculty member, a PhD student, postdoc, you make a decision. Are you going to license the technology? And if so, then you'll reach out to the Pfizers of the world and the Genentech of the world to license your technology. And they take that technology and commercialize it. If you are an aspiring entrepreneur and you think this is something you would like to take forward, then you still license it out of the university to your startup company. So now your startup company becomes a licensor, a licensee, and you are the licensor and you start a company. So ultimately there are two ways. Either you give it to someone else to do the work and you get the royalty check, or you decide that you're going to do the work. And so you form a separate entity and you do the work. So that's a kind of a bigger picture of how you commercialize the technology. And now just getting into a little bit of components of license agreement. And I know we touched a little bit on that on exclusivity. A license can be an exclusive license and can be a non-exclusive license. So since all of us who are Android users or Microsoft users, the Microsoft we are using, that's a non-exclusive license. That is why I can use Microsoft versions, you can use Microsoft versions. So that's a non-exclusive license agreement we all get. Exclusive is when a technology like a CRISPR, a warfarin, somebody takes a technology and says, we are going to be the exclusive holder of that. And usually that comes with additional royalty amount, because it is taking away an opportunity from an inventor to give it to 10 people. So the way exclusive licenses are done, if I could give it to 10 people and earn $1 from each one, I am $10 richer. But if I make it exclusive and I give it only to one, then that person needs to give me $10 plus additional amount, because then they are looking into, sorry about that, should have switched it off, because they are looking into not only the exclusivity which they have gotten from you, but the entire market share. And so for that, as an inventor, you need to be compensated. So always have in mind, as in future you go and become the licensors of technology, remember exclusivity and don't forget to ask, because an exclusive licensee will always try to cut you down there. You want to always ask. Territory is another thing. Some people take a geographical territory. I only need license in the US. I only need license for the Asia. I need a license for the Europe. And that's how, and in those regions, they can have exclusivity. So you are giving different exclusive license based on the territory. So that becomes another way. Market is another aspect of looking into it. Royalty payment terms, which I mentioned, typically that is where I get, when I talk about this particular topic to a lot of graduate students in the field of STEM, that is the question they ask, to understand if they are starting a company. They were a PhD or a postdoc student, they created a drug or a device, now they're starting a company, they're licensing it, but they've just graduated. They don't have millions of dollars to pay for the license to the university. How do they manage? The way it is structured is there are minimum royalty payment. Your royalty doesn't start till you make a dime in the market. So that is part of your license agreement. So that royalty payment terms are the ones you discuss. Would you reimburse the university for their patent expenses? What would you do? When would you do? And that's where the maximum negotiation and license agreement happens. So if tomorrow you are the person who's sitting on the side as a licensor and negotiating your license agreement, these are the 6 things you need to keep in mind. Is it exclusive, non-exclusive? Is it geographical territory focus? Is it a particular market and you have a platform technology? Imagine a guy who invented the flat screen. He just invented plasma screen. Did he ever knew that all of us would be holding 3 to 4 devices in our hands with that plasma screen? Right? And so that was a platform technology which went all over. So it can be market focused too, just for phones, just for TV. And that's how Sony's and Panasonics have licensed those technologies. Then the royalty payment terms. So always identify, are you a startup? Are you a startup, or you are an existing company, an established company? And that changes. So if I'm a licensor and I'm giving my technology to Pfizer, or to Merck, or to other companies, I know they have the money to pay the royalty right away. So I don't have to wait till they get the revenue. But if I know it's a startup company, then I build in milestones so that the startup company can pay for it. So that's another thing. And of course, the annual penalty and then termination. Termination is very important. Because if you are looking into something where you think this one is good, but in time I'll develop this, like GPS system, that license technology was licensed in that way, where GPS initially was used by NASA. And then when it came in the hands of that Garmin GPS system, if many of you are old enough to remember that, and then now on the phones, it has changed, and that license has changed as well. So that's the termination point on that. The next part, just to clarify, there are a lot of terms which people use, licensing versus assignment. So I want to clarify that, because this particular webinar was not on assignment, so I'm not going deep into it, but I just want to clarify in a sense, if you own a house and you give it to rent, that's licensing. If you sell it off, that's assignment. And in our life, where we cross it is when you will all go and work in big companies and as research scientists and many other roles, you will actually sign an employment agreement, which will say, if you come up with any intellectual property, you assign it to the company. Just the way all faculty members in their role as faculty assign their intellectual property to the university. So the university owns it, not the faculty member. But then university rents it out to Merck's and Syngentas. So that's an important aspect. So whenever you will file an invention disclosure with your technology transfer office, the first thing they will ask you to do after you've filled your invention disclosure is to sign an assignment. That assignment is actually formally telling that you are assigning it to university, because intellectual property is a right of an inventor. University is not an inventor. You as a faculty member, as a scientist, as a student are the inventors. So university have to formalize owning that technology by asking you to assign. So always remember, licensing, rent, assignment, selling, and think of it as for rent and selling, and hopefully that would give you some importance in aspect of it. Then why is it important? Licenses are needed to provide legal rights to practice. So if I want to practice something and you have invented it, and I know you have an IP on it, I can't just take and go with it. It's the same thing. You don't pick up certain things from Google and put it in your research paper or in your capstone course. That's plagiarism. In the invention world, that's the same thing. But by doing a license, it gives you a freedom to operate license agreement. And that's something where I can fearlessly use your technology with your permission and commercialize it to the potential. The other aspect is technology transfer, where you physically give. And that is a very common thing in universities, because universities are not manufacturing units. So even though they have invented a device, they cannot go and manufacture that device into the X-ray system, into the compliance. They just don't, that is not their strength. So they literally take their technology and they give the entire know-how to the Leicas of the microscopes, to the Sonys and different aspects of the microscope to do that. That's technology transfer. The other common ones which you'll see in licenses, where if any one of you have signed, has worked with HeLa cells or special model cells from Charles Rivers, and every time you sign a material transfer agreement, you're signing an in-license. You're taking their technology to this thing. So, and every time you're sending your cell lines to an outside university, that's an out license. So that's a licensing out when you're selling or you're doing the service or anything like that. So in my world, when I try to work with entrepreneurs and explain them, I say license agreement is a perfect match. It's a perfect match because take an example of a university and take an example of big companies. Big companies don't have funding to continue put in R&D into basic research. That's university's main mission, to put basic research and educational opportunities. So they do what they do best and take the basic research, and companies take that basic research and commercialize, because that's what they do well. So it's a perfect match in terms of risk minimization on both ends. University suddenly doesn't have to learn the manufacturing compliance and the testing and everything. And company doesn't have to spend hundreds and thousands of dollars in basic research. It's a reduction of cost overall in the economy. It allows immediate access to the technology, broad fields of contact. It's definitely competitive advantage, allows you to access new markets, collaboration, and ultimately as a license, you still own your own house. You're renting it out. You're not selling it, right? So it's still an asset. So I did want to talk a little bit about success stories in a sense, because it's a little bit of a climax here, because I wanted to show you some other technologies which have come out. But is there any questions which I can answer before I go there?
Yes, there are a few questions. You've actually, I think your passion is shining through and we're getting a lot of audience questions. So we'll start with one and maybe stop with 3 and then let you proceed so we can finish.
Sure, I only have 2 or 3 more slides, so I should be quick there.
Okay. So the question is, what would be the best strategy for a company to decide between a patent or a trade secret? Knowing that with a patent, you disclose your secret sauce.
That is always a question, and that is a risk you definitely take. My advice to people is when they are deciding between patent and trade secret, if it is something which you know that it is not novel, it's not obvious, it's just some additional spice or additional thing you have added, taking it as trade secret is better and protecting it is important. However, over time, I have seen that not playing well so often because employees change. You can have a non-compete, you can have a lot of things, but you can't change what they learned in your organization. They will carry that with that. And so how many times the things we have learned subconsciously, we use that when we are working. And so that you can't take. So trade secrets are extremely difficult to protect. And my suggestion would be to do that only when you have a super close knit network who's not going to. So there are people who are doing craft beers now. So they maintain their trade secret. It's very difficult to do the patent there, but they are very close. They know they have brought into that brewery together. That would be trade secret. If something you know can be patented, it's an additional cost, and you do see a commercial potential. You of course have to do cost benefit analysis as an entrepreneur always, because patent, by the time you go through the patent prosecution, you're looking at over the time period of 5 to 6 years, anywhere from 20,000 to 100,000 as a patent filing fees. So you want to have that. Are you going to make that much money with that technology? Then go for it. If you think no, then wait and discuss. Of course, this is case by case scenario, and it depends, but something to consider as an initial thought.
Thank you. We have, I'm going to read another question, but there are two questions that are kind of similar, so I'm going to combine them. What is the real patent protection if filed internationally? It seems some countries may not respect, and that patent prosecution could be cost prohibitive. So is it worth filing internationally? And then the other question similarly says, if something is patented in the US, a company in another country could legally produce the same patent in a foreign country. Is there a way to prevent?
Sure, that's a very interesting question. So if you are thinking of doing an international patent, the first question is, so think about it. Again, the intellectual property right. Why are you doing intellectual property rights? So that you get monopoly to sell your product. Ultimately, that's the end goal. Now, the first question you have to ask, if I want to do this patent in Japan as well, if I want to file this patent in Japan as well, do I have a market in Japan? If the answer to that question is no, you don't have a big market in Japan, my suggestion would be don't file in Japan, just file in US. Right? Because yes, there is an additional cost associated with every time you file a national application in a specific country, there is. In my life, I came across one anti-venom for a spider, which was invented here in US. When we started looking at patent filing, obviously the thought was, let's do it in US. And so we started getting ready to file in US filing. And we did go ahead and file it also. And then we started doing the market study, and it was a provisional application. And we realized that that particular spider is found only in continent Australia and in the islands of New Zealand and the islands surrounding that. Mostly the southern hemisphere bought, maybe in Antarctica, but nobody is living there, right? In that sense. And we thought, oh, then should we have filed in US? So we had to translate our strategy and go in US. So that's one thing. The next question, the next part of that you had asked, like, is it worth, or, some countries might not respect it. There's a difference between filing and enforcement. And you're right. And there is a notion in some Asian countries, India, China, where enforcement might not be there. But filing still gives you your right and your claim to raise a case. If you don't even file, then you can't even go to court. You will not have a day in the court. So I do say that if you do have market in India or China, and I hate to badger the country like that, but I know that there is an issue in patent enforcement like that. And so if that is the case, but you think that those are your market, I would still suggest you to file, because there is still at least a legal course of action against if there is an issue on that.
Thank you, Bandhana. we have more questions, but let's save them for the end. We'll encourage the audience here to keep adding your questions to the Q&A and upvote questions that you would like to see answered. And we'll hear a little more from Bandhana about careers and licensing and success stories.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I just wanted to share some of the success stories to see how many of these have Warfin. Many of you must have heard, came from University of Wisconsin. If you are an avid active person using Gatorade, then that came out of University of Florida. Beyond Meat, which is literally breaking the ceiling, came out of University of Missouri, and I was very fortunate to actually do a license agreement with Beyond Meat from our university. So I was the tech transfer person for that particular product, which is literally breaking the ceilings now. If COVID-19 situation, N95 mask, invented at University of Tennessee, Allegra, another university. If we are all safe in our cars because of Toyota crash test, which was invented, it was also from university. Blue water filter, which we all drink waters from technology. The colorectal cancer biomarkers invented here in town through USC technology. Zemplar, vitamin D, synthetic vitamin D for all the kidney patients which are doing dialysis, need synthetic vitamin D because they cannot produce it. That came out of university technologies and through license. All these are license examples. And then I also wanted to leave all of you with this website. It's University Technology Transfer Better World Project. It's out of AUTM, AUTM, Association for University Technology Managers. And if ever you are thinking twice about what you're doing in lab at 9:30 on a Saturday evening, and is it worth it? I would highly, highly, highly encourage you to go there and see that these projects which have literally transformed and transcended lives of many people who did not have access to technologies and many other things. And suddenly you're sitting at Saturday night in the lab will be so much worth it. I do want to, as I said, I have gone through a very dwindling road from science to business to law. I do want to discuss a little bit about, alternate careers in sciences. One thing which is coming up very often now is science and information, because as you all would recognize that science is very important and the brilliant minds of scientists are very important, but communicating that science is equally important. And earlier those things were done by different majors, but now more and more scientists understand the communication of it, and technical writing and scientific writing is becoming a very lucrative career in that sense. Science and financial world is another thing. If you are following the investment trends for last 2 decades, the major investments have been done in the scientific world, whether it is agriculture, everybody is talking about climate change, and how are we going to fight the climate change? Earth is not going to expand, water body is not going to increase, trees are suddenly not going to grow, and that will come through the innovations done by the labs in many labs around the world. And they understand that it is no longer a government issue. It has to be public-private partners. And there's a huge financial world which is getting into, and many of them are looking for scientific mind who have a financial acumen. So you have a lot of career options in venture capitalist firms, in investment banking, which maybe traditionally wouldn't even come to mind, but something for you all to think. Science and corporate world, this is part of entrepreneur series. So entrepreneurship is definitely part of that. Patent law, which I discussed a little bit, technology transfer, which I am myself personally beneficiary of. Science and service industry, this is another one, from corporate communications to consultant to executive teams. And then finally, and the most important one, if any of you love the government and love the policies, I'm not talking about the current administration, but anywhere beyond, I would highly encourage you to look at government agencies. We need scientific mind in those government agencies to develop policies which not only work for us, but for many generations to come in future. And that's the responsibility we all take as for me as former scientist and you all as a current scientist, and economic development in local regional areas in different roles. So those are some different career choices in science, and with that, I will be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Bandhana. Yeah. So we have quite a few questions here, and we have maybe about 8 minutes. So one of the questions, if we are working at a larger company with a strict assignment policy, what are ways we can keep ownership of personal research projects?
It's very hard to do so. Personal research projects, that has been a continued thing in law as well, because, so for example, if you are an engineer and you are employed with SpaceX doing aeronautical and aerospace work, but you are in your home sitting one day and invented a toaster sitting there. That toaster can be considered as your personal invention because your current job responsibility does not include an inventing a toaster. But if it is anything related to space or aerospace for which you are currently employed, it would be very difficult to say it is a personal invention. And that's a struggle many faculty members, postdocs face in their day-to-day life. I would suggest the only way you can do that, make sure you're not using any property of your employer, not even a pencil and paper, no PCR machines, nothing. And if without all that, you can still come up with a personal invention, you might have a case in that, but very difficult to do so.
Okay, thank you. What are milestone payments and what is their difference? How are they different from royalties?
So royalties, as I mentioned, royalties is something you get when you hit the market. So once you start, royalty as a term is when you start gaining revenue on the licensed technology, that's when you start getting paid royalty. Milestones is, if it is a drug invention, there can be 10 years before they see a penny out of the licensed technology. And so what they do is they have milestones in between. So when they do the large animal study successfully, they'll have something. Clinical trial 1, biocompatibility, if they were able to do a manufacturing. So those are known milestones in the commercialization journey towards the commercialization.
The next question we have is, how thoroughly does proof of concept, oops, I lost it. How thoroughly does proof of concept have to be done before filing a patent?
Proof of concept, not that much, and it differs. If you're an engineer, a proof of concept can be a design on the paper, and that can go. If you are a biotech scientist, that might be difficult because on paper is nothing. So it differs from invention to invention, but as long as you are close enough that it can be developed into a prototype. You have your specification, even if it is in the 3D printing, then you can file a patent. It has to be reduced to practice, but it doesn't have to be commercialized product.
Thank you, Bandhana. There are a few more questions. We have a couple of more minutes, so we'll keep going and do them as quickly as we can. So when negotiating licensing agreements with the university, how do I know the initial value of my company or my discovery?
It is very difficult to know. If you're doing an initial license, I would highly encourage you to explore option agreement. And if you're not familiar with it, after the presentation, I'll leave you with my email address. Happy to discuss that. But there's something known as option agreement, which gives you a year before you formalize your license. And I would highly encourage you to do that. Also, everybody understand at that early stage of a technology, evaluation is going to be speculative, but my sincere suggestion would be to make it evidence-based speculation. Have some clear, just the way when you design an experiment, you start with a null hypothesis and you have variables associated. You have to do the same way. It has to be evidence-based. You have to have some solid evidence to base your speculation.
Bandhana, the next question. In natural product IP, how do we keep communities with less legal knowledge from being excluded in ownership of their portion of a license or royalty? Are there recent successful examples?
Natural product. Are you talking about things like turmeric? So, so for example, turmeric, which is a very well-known spice in Indian cuisines and many other Asian cuisines as well, and in recent years have been identified as anti-cancer or anti-inflammatory. And people are trying to patent certain aspects of curcumin, which is not commonly used. Those are few things I have seen, but very, very difficult. Because another aspect of patent is it should not be in public domain, and it should not be sold already. And so if you are from those cultures where turmeric is used, people always knew anti-inflammatory aspect of turmeric. So very difficult to do natural product unless you have changed it somehow, where it is into a different product, a different application, then certainly yes.
There's one more question. It's a little long. Not sure I understand it, but we can figure it out together. Clarity on an earlier question. The FDA grants rights to patent holders after the patent runs out, called exclusivity. If the drug has less than 200,000 doses issued, then can you get exclusivity? I think that's the question. And can you explain how this works in concrete terms? Does that make sense? We can skip it and let the person reach out to you personally. I personally not sure exactly what they're getting at. Can you explain, this is a different question, can you explain first to file? If you have a provisional patent in the US and someone files overseas with the same product, do you have any rights?
So first to file, good thing is most of the countries look into first to file, as long as you have filed in US, and even if somebody has filed abroad, if you filed in US before them, you still have a claim to right. Because when you will go through the patent of prosecution, to suppose somebody has filed something in India or in China, and you filed it here, and it happens often when you have lab members who will file here, and then one lab member goes and files in a different country, you still have a claim. As long as your US filing was before the filing in abroad, you still have a claim.
I think this is a good question to close with, because what I've enjoyed most about this is how exciting that you've made it. You've been really passionate. If you can close us out with what made you want to go into law, and this person is also thanking you for talking about patents and the sign of a community, and they really enjoyed it. So what made you want to go into law?
So the transition from science to business was a transition where I thought I was doing well in science, but I continually faced something where the transfer was a problem. So then I started working in the technology transfer with a passion to dedicate taking science out of lab to marketplace. But in my journey, within 4 years of technology transfer work, I worked with a lot of biotech startup companies, which were university spin out. And one of the biggest line item I saw in their initial work was legal, and even things like patentability assessment. So I would say it was not a choice which I made actively. I actually went to law school to audit the class, to understand intellectual property enough so that the entrepreneurs and the students I was working with, I could help them in my role. And when I went there for the first class, I was very, very fortunate that my professor there was a federal judge, first woman federal judge handling intellectual property, Nanette Lowry, in the state of Missouri. And when she saw me in the class, and she was the one who encouraged, she said, we need more people who are coming from science background into law to understand this and take it further. You never have to be an attorney, but you can still do well if you know law. And that's I work with startup companies and I enjoy it. I don't work as an attorney, but I cannot tell you how important of a role that degree has played in my professional and personal life.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So it looks like we're running out of time. So with that, I'd just like to hand it off to Yordanos again for closing remarks.
Yes, thank you so much, Bandhana. I've already got an email saying this was such a dynamite webinar. So we really appreciate you being here and sharing your expertise and insight. Being so generous with your time. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I just want to put a plug for our next seminar. It's on July 31st at 9 a.m. And the topic is therapeutic drug development and regulatory approval. So we hope you will join us then. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
And that's
you.
my address.
Oh, yes, thank you.
And you all can like me on LinkedIn or anything. I can join you guys there. And this is the end. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I welcome any questions. You guys can send me the questions which I was not able to address. I can respond to them, and you can share it with the attendees.
Thank you, Bandhana.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Have a
Bye,
great
everyone.
rest of the day and amazing weekend ahead.
Thank you.
You too. Same.
Bye.